Welcome to the BCACC Matter of the Mind presentation. Tonight we are doing a presentation all about understanding self-compassion, practicing it, modeling it for others. It's going to be a great evening, so I want to thank you so much for joining us. We have got Lisa Baylis. Hi, Lisa. I don't know if you can see her.
Hi,
There we
everybody.
go.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, so Lisa Baylis has, I'm sure she'll introduce herself as well, but she is an educator, she's a counselor, a school counselor, spent a lot of time in the education system, and really has a dedicated passion for the wellness and community sense of belonging people of BC. So she's dedicating a lot of her time and attention to that these days, as well as a new appointment as the Director of Education for the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. So I want to just take 2 minutes to talk about BCACC. So we are the Association for Clinical Counsellors throughout the province, and our members carry the designation. You can see that logo at the bottom, shows they've met the highest standards for counseling in BC, which is pretty important. And these presentations, we're now getting into quite a few of them, but it's our effort in terms of showcasing counselors in general and really bringing helpful information forward to the people of BC. So whatever is relevant and important, we want to bring it forward. And we're always looking for suggestions if you've got one. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I'm coming from. So I know we're probably coming from many different communities and territories today. I'm coming from the land of the Lekwungen speaking people, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And I encourage you, if you want to take a moment and put where you're coming from as well. It's always nice to see the breadth of who we've got out there. And I want to welcome you, Lisa, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm so happy to be here and welcome everybody to this evening. We're going to talk about, as Nikki said, understanding self-compassion, how to practice it, how to model it, what it sounds like, what it feels like, and how it can be incorporated into your life. And like Nikki, I'm also here on the Lekwungen people's territories of the Esquimalt, Songhees, and West Saanich, and I'm feeling really grateful. I got out for a walk today on these lands and just to honor how it feels to actually be on land sometimes can be such a powerful practice of wellness. In my time here on these lands as a visitor to these lands, I've been had the privilege to work with many different communities and families, especially in the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. And I had the privilege in my last school to work with an elder who taught me a Coast Salish word called not samat. And not samat means coming together or being together as one. And actually here on the island, we have a not samat building at one of our colleges, and it's a place of learning. But when I was taught this word, it wasn't just a physical coming together. And even it's a meeting place like we're doing here in this Zoom room. I was taught that it's also a coming together of how we feel and experience our being. So it's a kind of a connection of our head and our heart. And today, as we're here practicing and understanding the concepts and learning more about self-compassion, I want you to think about how do we engage not just from knowing, but also how do we engage from feeling this lived and embodied experience as we go through it. Before we even get started, I'm going to talk about what you're going to leave here with today. There's 3 things I want you to remember. The first is that just being human is hard, and we all know this, and we work with people who experience this, but just a really lovely reminder that that's an important part of this and that you're not alone in those feelings. And then lastly, a question that we're going to come back to, which is what do you need right now? So I start with that just so you know where we're going, but those are going to be the 3 things when you leave here, you're going to be like, I know why, how to experience this, and what that's going to feel like. So before we go any further, there's something that I think is one of the most important things we can do, and that's actually modeling the transition from doing and being in our whole lives to being here right now. So intentionally moving into this present moment and settling in from wherever you were and whatever you are doing. So maybe just as we do this, so many of you are arriving here and telling us where you're landing from, but if you also want to just use the chat, tell me how you are feeling. So before we get into a practice, I just love a couple words. How are people arriving on this Tuesday evening? what would be a word that you would say is an experience of how you are feeling? Are you still eating your dinner? Are you moving quickly to get there? Are you feeling settled? Are you feeling tired? Are you feeling at ease? So just like I love to use, I can see the chat and it's really great when people are popping in, and already I'm seeing a couple feelings of I'm feeling tired. Yeah. It's June. This is often how we arrive in the beginning of June. There's a lot going on. I'm seeing words like frazzled and overwhelmed, but I just want to honor those. But also the fact that the word grateful and tired but comfortable, right? That we can hold this ability to be tired and happy. I can be energized and exhausted. And today we're going to talk about how we can hold all of these feelings in a container of compassion. So whether you're feeling pulled in many different directions, as we often are, I'm going to invite you to pause for a few moments and just settle to be here and actually transition on purpose. So that might mean for you to actually put down your dinner if you're eating it off camera, or put down your drink, or if you're driving and listening, maybe even pull over for a second, right? We're very good at multitasking. Let's see if just for a moment we can be here. You don't have to do much more than just listen to my voice, and take a really nice, big, juicy, deep breath. The kind of breath that just fills you up on the inhale, and you know how it feels to exhale and release. And as you do that, as you take your breath out of your body, allow your feet, if they can reach, to settle onto the ground. Actually, let that whole process of grounding and noticing if your feet can reach the ground, and allow that whole practice of feeling your feet. Take a moment as you notice how your feet feel on the ground, and perhaps how the chair is holding your seat, and seeing if you can drop your shoulders for a moment, maybe lengthen through your neck, and just pause and listen. Listen to the spaces around you, to the surrounding sounds, perhaps even to the ones that are closer to you. Maybe even the sound of your own breath as it comes in. And if you choose to close your eyes or just lower your gaze, take a moment and just really pause. Give yourself this intentional invitation to be here in this moment, or even just a very short pause. And as you're pausing and finding stillness, if you notice your body is still frantic, you're noticing your breath is quick, or you're still feeling feelings of tired or overwhelmed, can you just allow whatever is aware that you're noticing right now to exist just as it is? Tonight is not about changing or fixing or solving. It's just about being. And it's about being in a presence of kindness and care and compassion. So if your eyes are closed, perhaps on your next inhale, lift your gaze, and as you exhale, intentionally come back to our screen. It doesn't take long to move from the doing and the busy to the being, to just being here for just a moment. So hopefully, as many of you are arriving in here, you take this opportunity to just pause and to create that space. So thank you for doing that. My name is Lisa Baylis, like Nikki said. I'm a teacher. I've been in education for 20 years. I was a school-based counselor. I've had the privilege to speak across North America. Probably the most important job I do is now as a mom to my little chickens here, who are keep me learning every day. We're now 12 and 13, but I can't seem to remove this picture because they're just so adorable. And as Nikki said, I'm also now the new education director for Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. And it's in all these hats that I wear that I have really discovered how pulled people are, as many of you said. We're exhausted, depleted, feeling fatigued and overwhelmed. And I'm really on a mission to change this story about how well-being looks, with the practice of self-compassion being the foundation. And I want us all to learn how we can use this practice of compassion as a way to really integrate our full, sustainable wellness practices in our life. And I think being a mom is probably the thing that has driven me the most into all of this. Those of you who are care for people, you know how much patience you need to add into your life. This work for me, however, started because I was an educator hoping to help change systems and how to create ways of being for teachers, and especially in the wellness world. And I was doing a lot of retreats and caring for teachers, and I found I needed more learning, and I had been teaching mindfulness for many, many years, and I discovered the works of Dr. Kristen Neff and Dr. Chris Germer. So much of what you're going to be exploring today is due to the foundational and empirical research that they have done and have been sharing for over a decade now, and we're seeing huge growth in this. So you can see their book, Kristen's book, Self-Compassion and the Mindful Path to Self-Compassion. It was in this experience, I actually had the privilege of working with Dr. Kristen Neff. We created a course called Self-Compassion for Educators, which then led me to write a book called Self-Compassion for Educators, where Kristen wrote the foreword. So I've had the privilege of not only working with them, writing with them, and now I work for in their foundation. I do this because the content and the research that they have shared is probably some of the best curriculum I have ever seen. And as an educator, I've seen a lot of curriculum out there of different ways to bring this into our world. And so at the end of today, I'm going to show you a whole bunch of different resources that you can use beyond this for different people at different stages, teens, youth, adults, educators. But, this is the foundation of the work we're doing. And whether you are an RCC, whether you're a parent, whether you're a counselor, whether you're an educator, however you're arriving in today's space, all of what we're going to do today is going to share ways to support this and learn it for you. Okay, so I just got to take a big breath because we model what we need to do. And sometimes we get going quickly, and I'm just going to slow myself down. And I want to remember that first takeaway that I said, that being human is just hard. And it doesn't mean it's not without joy and gratitude and happiness, as many of you put in those chat in the beginning, but it's also can be full of challenges. And we have been through very difficult few years. Last night, I had the privilege actually of being at Esquimalt grad. I worked at Esquimalt for 8 years. Esquimalt High School is a school here in Victoria. It's a grade 9 to 12 school. And this is my first year stepping away from the school. So I've been a school-based counselor for many years, and this year I'm not doing that because of my other roles. And I got to go back last night. And what was interesting for me, and I'm sharing this story with you, is because I was watching these grade 12 cross the stage, and I was really moved by just how resilient they have been and how strong and connected they were. But here in Victoria, our high schools go from grade 9 to 12. So this was a cohort of students who were in high school for their very first year when COVID hit. So they were the grade 9s who started their high school experience, got all excited, and then by spring break, they were asked to go in isolation. And for many of us who work with teens, we know how hard this can be. It was hard on us as adults. It was even harder on these kids. So to see this disconnection of time for so long, and then to see them walk across the stage last night, back in person and in connection, was such a moving experience. Because these challenging years have had a huge impact on us as community, and in this opportunity to connect, and in how we relate to ourselves. And I really believe now more than ever, we need to prioritize giving ourselves permission to care for ourselves. We have been very good at looking after others, especially many of you here. You're here because you're caregivers. You show up for other people and you hold the space for so many others. So learning to reprioritize including yourself in that circle is a really important piece for me. And part of that is having boundaries to understand what it is that we need, and then how we can share and model it and ripple it out. And what we know about compassion is the more we support ourselves with it, it gives us more capacity to give it to others. We're going to talk a lot about compassion today. The thing about compassion is we can't really talk about this concept of compassion without talking about suffering, without talking about stress or struggling. In fact, the definition of compassion is to notice and see hurt or pain, or to notice suffering and have a desire to alleviate it, to help, to be with it. And many of you on this chat would know that this is just a natural way of being for many of you. You naturally show up in a compassionate way because you see hurt and you want to help. And today what I want to do is invite you back into this circle of how do you include yourself in that capacity. So what happens when this one too has been through a challenging few years and is struggling and is having a hard time? How do we meet ourselves with the same care and kindness so that we can alleviate our suffering? Because in it all, it can be a really difficult time. So let's talk about how self-compassion can help. And what I want to do first off right away is an exercise. And this is an exercise where you'll actually need a pen and paper. Or you could, make some notes on your phone, or you can type on your computer. But I want you to actually take some ideas out of your head and I want you to put them somewhere for a second so we can see them. If you are in a place where you can do this, I really appreciate you just taking a few minutes and scribbling down some ideas. And here's what we're going to do. Oh, I jumped ahead of myself. Woo, rewind, just kidding. We're going to get there. Keep your pen and paper out because you're going to want to need that. So before I get there, what I want to tell you is why this information has been so important for me. And I'll also tell you a story that when I first looked into this, I was wondering whether or not self-compassion was something that felt a little woo-woo, or how did I know about it? And one of the reasons I loved it is that it's been really well researched. And the research has shown that self-compassionate people tend to model these ways of being. They tend to be happier, less stressed, and much more resilient. And when I started looking at this research, I realized that this has a huge impact on how we help ourselves and how we help others. So just by practicing self-compassion, which is what we're going to do in a second, it leads to that ability of increasing happiness, optimism. It helps us to experience higher levels of gratitude and connect better in relationships. Research has shown that the more we practice this, that it actually decreases our stress. And the reason it does that is it's that wonderful antidote to that inner critic or perfectionist thinking that many of us get caught up on, right? That we're inundated with social media filtered platforms and Pinterest boards that make everything wonderful. And we think that our lives have to be a certain way. And self-compassion invites us to come back to our humanness, and that not everything has to be perfect because it doesn't exist. And we don't have to get caught up in the critical thinking so much. That was a real big one for me. And it was a really big one on why I practice and continue to practice. And then the other reason why self-compassion has been such a big piece of practice and why it's so important is it shows that resilience, just like those grads crossing the stage, whether they were deeply into self-compassion practice, they were having capacity of people sharing kindness, care, and compassion towards them so that they could bounce through really hard times. And what self-compassion says is we are all humans and we are going to make mistakes. We just being human is hard, right? Remember, that's one of our takeaways. This being human is hard. But this practice allows us to bounce. It allows us to grow in our resiliency, and it gives us sort of a stronger container to hold all of the feelings and the challenges that we go through. So this is a bit of the reason why I got pulled into it, because I really appreciated the research and why I continue to practice on a regular basis. Now, when we get into the exercise. So why is important, but more important is because we can know up here that this is really valid. We can read that and be like, okay, I get it. But how we do it and how we practice it is really important. So here's what I'm going to invite you to do. I want you to think about a time when you had a really close friend who was struggling in some way. And if you're here as an educator, if you're here as a counselor, you might think of a client that you're really, thinking about right now, or you might think of a student, or if you're a parent, you might even think about, one of your children who are going through something. But what I want you to think about is if this person were to come to you and tell you about how they were feeling inadequate, or how they had failed at something, or how they were struggling with a relationship or in a health concern. I want you to write down for a moment, what are the things that you would say to this human on a day when you were feeling typically strong and healthy and connected and well? So when you are well, how do you respond to someone who is struggling, especially one of your dear people in your lives? And just write down a few words on your paper, on your notes, on your phone. What are the words or phrases that you would offer to someone when they're struggling? And as you're writing these down, I also want you to think, what would your tone of voice sound like? What's your body language like? Can you be aware of what that might sound like? And you're not going to share these with anyone. This is just for you. So please just take a moment to reflect on that and just write down a few of those words. What do you say to a dear friend who is struggling? The other thing I'll say is there's no right or wrong here. So whatever comes up for you is just what needs to come up right now. So on those days when you're feeling okay, what are the things you say to a friend? And just perhaps have a look at the words you're writing down, maybe seeing what's coming up, maybe paying attention to, again, the tone of voice that comes out, or the felt feeling, or the body language. Then I'm going to invite you to take a big, deep breath, and I'm going to get you to consider actually a time when you were the one who was struggling. So what happens when you are the one who's going through the same thing as your dear friend or your client or student? When you're feeling inadequate or underappreciated, or you failed at something, you're feeling unworthy, or you're struggling in a relationship, or you're just having a difficult moment, please write down right beside where you wrote what you would say to a friend. Write down right beside that. What do you say to yourself when you were the one who's struggling? What are the words or phrases that come out of your own heart into your own head at those moments? And perhaps also pay attention once again, what does the tone of voice sound like here? What's your body language like? Is there a different felt feeling? And again, there's no right or wrong. There's nothing that you have to say or hear. And this is just an exercise in noticing. And you will not be sharing this with anyone else. These are also just for you as you're putting them down on a piece of paper or you're writing them on your computer. And as you sort of finish off this exercise and reflect on it, I'm actually going to invite you to use the chat for a moment and tell me not what you wrote, but what did you notice about this very short exercise? I'm going to try and keep up with a few of the comments in the chat, and I know Nikki's going to watch with me along here. But as you do this very simple exercise of how do you talk to a friend and how do you treat yourself in these difficult moments, I'm curious, what happens for you? And I'm starting to see things. I give others more grace than I give myself. Thanks for Carrie for starting us off. I'm very hard on myself. Okay, what else? How other people respond? Thank you so much for using this chat. I don't talk or treat to myself with that compassion. There's very different tones, and I really appreciate that you notice that tone, that sometimes the words that we say things, we can be much harsher on ourselves than we are with other people. I view myself from a place of judgment, but I can see my friends with empathy and kindness. It was difficult to come up with ideas for myself and super easy with others. So you can see how many of you uplift others rather than myself. Many of you are coming up with the same things. I'm too firm with myself. I have really high expectations. But I appreciate that you sharing in here because one, it's making me realize like how many of us felt that way. We're not on our cameras right now, but I bet if we were, all of our hands would be coming up saying like, yeah, I'm much harsher on myself. I'm more evaluative. I'm easier to be patient with other people, but it's not to myself. Um, so, like that is part of what many of us experience. And what I want to share with you is that's what actually the research says. So, and if you'd like to put your cameras on and share with me, I am looking for you and I would love to see your faces. So I know that those were set off in the beginning, but if you'd like to engage, I have my cameras up and I have the whole screen so I can see you. And it's always lovely to see other faces. So just on that note, if you would like to, you're welcome to. And I always appreciate it. So the research shows, like many of you have noticed, it's much easier to be caring and compassionate with other people. And it's a little bit more challenging when it's ourselves, that we find it quite a bit easier to offer that kindness outward. But when it comes back to ourselves, it's quite more challenging. Almost 80% of the general population found this research. And I had said to Kristen a couple of weeks ago, I'd actually like her to do this again because this data's a little bit old now that we're seeing, that this was in 2016. I am so curious if this would change over the last little while as we continue to do this work. But the invitation here is not that we need to continue to, or we need to stop giving compassion out. It's actually that bottom number that says 16% about equal. And, I saw here, there was a comment that someone said, as I got older, I find I'm being more kind to myself. And that's actually the invitation that we want to do, that we include ourselves in that circle, that we don't stop sharing the compassion outward, but we start to include ourselves in this practice, that this one too is deserving of the same practice so that we can show up and continue to care for other people. And so it's this circle of practice, this circle of giving compassion outward and receiving it for ourselves that really starts to help us in the process of sharing it with others. And then modeling. We're talking a little bit today about what modeling self-compassion looks like, and this is part of it. The general definition of self-compassion, if you haven't heard, is just truly, can I treat myself the way I would treat my best friend? Can I talk to myself with the same tone and grace and patience and kindness, like many of you put in those words, that I would talk to my friends, my students? Man, our puppies, we talk nicer to our dogs and our pets than we talk to ourselves? Can we talk to ourselves the way we talk to our pets, right? Like, oh, you cute little puppy, right? Like, we're so sweet and caring with them. And there's that invitation to bring that back to ourselves. Um, I want to share an example of how I use this in my practice once. So I had a student named Grace who came in, and I know not all of you are counselors here, and that's okay if you are. I just want to show an example of how I modeled this in my world. And I had a student, she was in grade 11, and she was at a time where she was really self-deprecating, really, really having a hard time. Bright, musical, smart, courageous young girl. She would come into my office and she would just cry, and she would cry, and she would talk about how terrible she was at everything, and how much she was struggling, and how nobody liked her. And I had known this young lady for quite a long time, so I want to put that caveat in. I had built a real strong relationship. So what I'm going to share with you is something that I do once I have a relationship with somebody. It's not something I just jump into. But I looked at Grace once, and I said to her, this young girl who had been in tears, I said, she was talking about how awful she was on herself. And I said, you're being really judgmental, and I'm noticing how much this is hurting your heart. And she's just like, I can't stop saying these things because I believe them. And I looked at her and I said, listen, darling, do you have any little people in your life? And she says, yeah, I have a cousin who's 4. I look after him every Wednesday. I said, I want you to imagine he's sitting right here now. Everything you're saying to yourself, I want you to say to him. And she started to look at me, her eyes just like this, and she started to cry again. She said, no, like, I would never say that he's ugly and he's terrible and he's not smart. And we started to connect. And I said, listen, when you say those things to yourself, your heart is listening. She had this kind of like, like open and eye-opening experience. And I said, there is a little Grace in you that is really understanding how much this hurts right now, just like you talk to your little cousin in these kind and caring and sweet ways. She was very, very bright. I said, we need to rechange how you address yourself, and we need to meet yourself with kindness. So Grace had this little bit of an awakening, but I have to say that this didn't shift her instantly. And the reason I share this story is that we can know this, but it takes practice to change. And I worked with her for an entire year. And by the end of grade 12, she was another one of these beautiful grads who came up to me at the end and was just beaming. You should really practice what we had been going through, this idea of, can I talk to myself the way I would talk to my friend? Can I start to notice when I'm being critical and say, ooh, girl, like, that's not nice. Like, that is not the voice we want to listen to. And how do we start to switch the voices that we are paying attention to? So I say this and I share this story not because I want you to jump in and do it right away. I will say, again, I had a really strong relationship with this young lady before I brought some of this practice in, but it's a lovely model to and a lovely way to connect with people, of just saying, do you talk to yourself the way you would talk to your friend? And the other thing I'll say is, this for me really shifted when I noticed my daughter also being a little bit judgmental. And I'll share another story. She was 5 at the time. She's now 11. And I remember curling into bed with her one night, and she said to me, Mommy, I just had a bad day and I'm really bad at school and none of my friends like me. And she was just having one of these moments. And maybe you've had little people in your life who are like this. And I remember, holding her in my arms and saying, honey, you're okay. You'll be just fine. You're grade 5, or you're 5 years old. You're not supposed to be good at art yet. You get years to practice. And tomorrow you'll go back and your friends will love you and you'll have a good day. And what are we looking forward to and what are we grateful for? And she went to bed and to sleep and she felt great. And I went back to my office and I opened up the slide deck that I was working on. I was like, oh, these are crap. No one's going to like me. I can't believe I created this. What a terrible thing I'm doing. Oh my goodness. And I went, what am I saying to myself? And the biggest part of this is not that we don't stop. It was one of these ahas where I went, like, I would never say out loud to Gracie, my daughter also, but I say it to myself all the time. And I really started shifting my inner language. Can I change what I say to myself when I have those days of self-doubt or self-loathing or frustration? Can I check in and be like, this is not the voice that I need to pay attention to right now? And recognizing that this is a really important practice. So for me, one of the things that I say is, if I wouldn't say it out loud to my daughter, I don't say it out loud to anybody, including myself. And that's a big shift. And just starting to be aware of my own voice in my head. I'm going to take another big breath. These big blue bubbles are my reminders to just like take big breaths as I share stories and information with you. So I'm talking about self-compassion, and I'm saying that it's the way to treat yourself as a friend, but what is it really? And I want to talk about what the research with this shows, because there are three components that we need to know and understand. And I jumped to them too quickly. There they are. So to understand how we practice self-compassion, we need to understand these three components. The first component is this concept of mindfulness. I know you've heard it. You can't go anywhere. You can't even walk past the magazine rack without seeing the word mindfulness. And I know that it's out there. But what does it mean? If you've never practiced mindfulness before, whether you're a lifelong meditator, it's an ability to pay attention on purpose, right? It's the ability, and in self-compassion world, the mindful practice is the actual paying attention to when we're hurt, struggling, suffering. How many of you have come home at the end of a long day? You've been working with clients or students, or you've been out in your world and you're like, shoulders are at your ears and you're making dinner and you're banging pots and pans and your body is tight and someone looks at you and says, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" And you're like, "Nothing's wrong. I'm just fine." And you realize your whole body is tense. We spend a lot of our time going, doing, we wonder why we're tired after, but we haven't spent any time during our day pausing and actually noticing, how am I doing? What's going on? The practice of mindfulness in the world of self-compassion is actually this just awareness. It's the moment that says, "I'm not okay," or "This is hard," or "This is a moment that's difficult," or "This voice is not the one that I need to listen to right now." It's the awareness without getting judgmental or overreacting about it. It's just the paying attention. And then once we pay attention, we can bring in this lovely practice of common humanity. And this is my favorite one. And it's also that ability to remember that, and as we noticed in the chat here with that practice, that many of us feel the same way, that everyone makes mistakes, that we're not alone. My favorite way to put this is that we're all perfectly imperfect, actually, and that life is messy. And when I think about common humanity, I often think of common humanity on a continuum. And this continuum is sort of this beautiful long line, and somewhere in the middle is this messy humanness. And I would love if you want to engage with me here for a second. This somewhere in there is this messy humanness, and we get kind of pulled with life. And on one side, we kind of get pulled over to this side of the continuum, and we're feeling something really difficult. It's really hard, and we feel very isolated. I see this a lot with teens. If you work with teens, you might know what this is like. The feeling comes up. They don't think anybody's ever felt it. They feel very alone. We go through this too. And although your experience is unique to you, the emotions you're feeling are actually very, very human. All humans know grief, loss, suffering, pain, anger, frustration, resentment, shame. So this holding of the emotion is a human experience. So there's this invitation to come back and to name it and to be aware of it, and to not be so isolated and alone in your feelings. The other side that we kind of get pulled to on this common humanity continuum, and again, if you want to put your hand up or a thumbs up in the chat if this resonates with you, life is hard right now, but you know what? Other people have it way worse than I do. And so I just don't need to feel these feelings. I'm just going to stick them in my back pocket, or I'm just going to ignore, or it's like there are way worse things going on in the world, and my feelings aren't valid. Anybody relate to that? Those of you who might be here, throw a chat in or a thumbs up or a high five on your screen. What I see a lot is people really relating to that piece. It's like the world is suffering. Thank you, Cheryl says, every day. And our feelings aren't valid. And so what we do is we get into this comparative suffering piece, is that we kind of tuck our feelings down, or we shove them in our pockets, or we just deny them. And what happens there is they bubble up and they come out. And when we don't want them, they come up as big emotions, and we're yelling and we don't know why, or we're getting sick and we're not actually tending to our humanness. So every time we talk about this, it's this lovely reminder to come back to this common humanity. So we pay attention, we notice, we remember we're not alone and that our feelings are valid. And then we add this lovely third component, which is loving kindness. And loving kindness is just that, can I talk to myself the way I would talk to a friend? Can I meet myself with those words? And when I realize I'm not meeting myself with those words, can I come back and can I meet myself with kindness and love? And we're gonna play with some of this today as a way of understanding it a little bit more. So those three components are a really important piece as we begin to practice. The other thing I will say is that when we start to understand self-compassion, the other piece is to understand that there's two ways of showing up in self-compassion. There's a yin, Kristen Neff calls it the yin and the yang, or the tender and the fierce. And I like to think of these as components that you need both of them. And much of what we're going to share today is more of the tender side. This is the side that says things are hard right now. How do I treat myself with care? It's a very soothing and validating part. It's the sort of coming in. It's like that coming home and being gentle with ourselves. It's the piece of just reflecting on our needs and how do we support ourselves. I often think about this being tender is like, what would a perfect mother do? Maybe not your mother or my mother, but if you imagined a perfect mother, what would those words or phrases come out? And that's how we meet ourselves with that like tender side. And there's the other part of self-compassion. That's more of a fierce. I can even feel my body want to like show up larger with it. And the fearsome part is that it's the acting in the world. It's the showing up. It's the setting boundaries. It's the protecting ourselves and the people around us. It's the providing for our families and for the people and supporting. It's the motivation in that fierce and caring and loving way that says you can do hard things. Problem with yang compassion is if we stay there all the time, which many caregivers do, people who work with other people, they stay in this beautiful, fierce place of showing up for others, is we get exhausted. This is where we see a lot of the burnout happen, is in this fierce world because we're showing up and acting in the world. And then we need to relearn how to come back and be tender with ourselves and be with ourselves. But if we stay on the tender side all the time, we go inward and we're just reflecting, then like nothing gets done. Like we gotta be able to show up and do the work too. And so I hold these both for you today. And as we're practicing, you may notice you may have more fierce energy, or you may be reflecting more in the tender state. Neither are right or wrong. It's just that what does your body need as you go through those? So those are really important things to notice. I just dropped this quote in here because I think it's one of the most important ones I've ever read when it talks about self-compassion. I'm going to read it to you. It says, it's by Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, and she says, the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. I remember having this quote up on my computer. My daughter came in once and she's like, Mommy, that doesn't make sense. And I was like, well, tell me what you mean, baby girl. What do you mean? What about this doesn't make sense? And she says, well, if you go in water, you get wet. Like, you are so smart. That's it. That's exactly what I'm saying. I said, what I'm saying is that when people are surrounded by hurt, pain, suffering, loss, they feel it too, just like you're in a pool of water. And what I think is I'm noticing as I'm sharing this work around the world, is I'm noticing that people who are caregivers, who are counselors, therapists, teachers, they're showing up, they're in the deep end of this pool of suffering. And right now, what I want to invite you to do today is just get out of the pool. And not that I can change the world, the system, and all the things that are suffering, but for a moment, we're just going to sit on the edge here today. Because although we can't stop and change all of the things that are in the world, what we don't need to do is feel like we're in the deep end drowning and feeling like we cannot get our head above water. And the most beautiful thing we can do with the practice of self-compassion is a very slow wade back into that pool. And so when we learn some practices today, what it does is it allows us to touch on suffering, meet it, and care for ourselves so that we don't get caught up and pulled out into the deep end all the time. And that as we continue to practice, because this work is an ongoing practice, and I'll show you why, as we continue to practice, we get a little bit deeper each time. But the next time we're in the deep end, maybe we've got our life jacket on and we've got some tools that help us float a little bit. And so I share this because, again, we can't talk about compassion without talking about suffering. And many of you are here today because you work in a world or in a space where suffering is really relevant. And when we're holding suffering and care for everyone else, it is inevitable that we will feel it, whether it's through vicarious or secondary trauma, or whether it's because we're just holding everybody else's feelings. Today, what I want to do is help you understand how to let go of some of that and really deeply care for yourself in that process. Which brings me back to our second takeaway today, which is you are not alone in your feelings. This is that beautiful reminder. And in fact, I just maybe I shouted it again in the chat. How many of you really resonated with that feeling suffering quote, that Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen quote, because you're like, yes, I feel like I'm in the deep end. I'm feeling quite fatigued or exhausted these days. As you showed up here, there was words that many of you were saying, like, I'm tired, frazzled, overwhelmed. It's been a hot day. It's been a lot. I'm holding. And one of the things, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Thank you. I love the interactions. So please keep them up. You're doing a great job of, throwing those thumbs up for me, because it helps me recognize that we're not alone, right? That's part of it, is to sort of show our common humanity in this, and that as we experience this and these feelings, it helps us to understand that. So thank you for all of those sharing. So what I want to actually do, again, remember I said there's a connection of, that Kusalish word, the not samat, the knowing. We can know all of this. We can understand it up here. But what does it sound and feel like? And I'm going to do something crazy. I think Nikki's going to probably kill me for a second. But Nikki, here's what I want to do. This is going to be a bit wild, but I want to take everybody who's willing to take themselves off mute for a moment. I want you to, all of you, come off mute if you're willing to. And what I want you to do, those of you who are willing, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take yourself off mute. And what I want you to do is I want you to tell me what the stress sound like. So unmute yourself and make me a sound of what does stress sound like. So good. Okay, you all nailed it. Mute again for a second. I love it. Nikki's laugh is what I hear right now. Okay, so now here's what I want you to do. I want you to all do this again. We're going to all come off mute, but this time I want you to tell me, what does mindfulness sound like? You were to make a sound with mindfulness. What does it sound like?
Oh, it's okay. Everything's going to work out. Breathe in, breathe out.
Great. Okay. And pause theme. Perfect. Thank you. That was I heard a lot of it's okay. And I even heard just some breathing and some breathe in, breathe out. Right. It was wonderful. Very, very good. Often mindfulness has this opening feeling, and we kind of, take a deep breath and we soften and, right. Self-compassion has a sound too. And the reason I want you to do this is I want you to try and see if you can hear the sound of self-compassion. So here's what I want you to do this time, just before you unmute yourself, is I want you to imagine that you're holding a brand new baby or puppy, whatever you lean towards more. This is like the most brand newest being in the world. And you look down at this perfect brand new face. What sound do you make as you gaze upon this face? And you can unmute yourself and tell me, what does that sound like?
Aww, so cute. Blessed.
Yeah, lovely. Oh, even at the end there, her just this, right? Thank you. You all did that so beautifully, Nikki. I'm so sorry to put you through that. But it's really fun because we can hear this self-compassion. And thank you. If you haven't put yourself back on mute, please feel free to do that. Self-compassion has this beautiful sound. It goes, oh. We know when we've hit it because our body just kind of goes, oh, thank you. It's like this, honey, I got you. Like as we gaze at this brand new baby and just go, oh. So when we're practicing, our whole body, our heart, our experience just kind of turns toward with care and love, just as we would gaze upon this new being. And so I play with that because as you start to experience this or play with self-compassion a little bit, you might start to notice that sound comes up. And some of you actually heard it a little bit in the mindfulness, like, it's okay, you're fine. But self-compassion has more of that tenderness, that deep love, like, oh yeah, I'm good, I've got this. One of the ways that is most powerful and probably the quick and easiest way to practice self-compassion is through a practice called soothing and supportive touch. And I share this with you because it is one that's also been really researched. And I have to tell you, the first time I heard this, I was like, there's no way I'm doing this. This sounds like the most woo-woo thing. Nope, this is not for me. And so I just want to invite you to know a little bit more about this, because what I discovered in my first bit of resistance to it was it had a lot of research to it, and now it's the number one practice I use more than anything. And the way soothing and supportive touch works is it's the antidote to our threat defense system. Many of you know about this stress response, right? And as we are in the world and feeling stressed and overwhelmed, we increase our own stress response by criticizing ourselves. Yes, there's some threats in our world, but most of us live in a pretty safe environment these days. And yet we continue to create circles of anxiety and stress and overwhelm in our life. And much of that is because of the way we talk to ourselves. And this stress response creates, more adrenaline and cortisol in our body and keeps us activated. And as human beings, we have a different system that we can attend to. It's, we want to get out of this threat defense system. A lot of this work was pioneered and researched by Dr. Paul Gilbert, who talked about compassion counseling, compassion therapy. And he talks about how do we come back and meet into our what he calls the mammalian caregiving system. This is that system that raises our brand new babies, the ones we were all just holding in our arms, right? When we hold our babies, we rock them. They can't speak and they cry. We soothe them. We talk to them in real tender ways, and we pat them, and we sort of rock back and forth, and we use these gentle tones and gentle ways of being. And we can do this with other people, and we see someone who's hurt and we say, can I put my arm around you? Can I offer you a hug? You need to be cared for right now. And we can generously offer this support outward. One of the things that research is showing more and more is that as we practice this, we can also offer it to ourselves. And sometimes we do it without even knowing it. And many of you might have discovered you may have been practicing it, on your days all the time. But today I want to invite you to move toward it with a little bit of intentionality. I find myself often doing this. And again, this might resonate for you, but how many of you are standing in the grocery line waiting, looking at your watch, going, I wish this would go faster. And you start to notice yourself rocking, right? Like just going back and forth, especially perhaps if you've been a parent and you're used to sort of this holding your babies and rocking whenever they needed. This rocking motion, this caregiving motion, counteracts our threat defense system. It keeps us in this. And if you've done any somatic work as a therapist or any counseling, you know how we need to touch into our body and slow down and meet with ourselves. So the soothing and supportive touch practice that I want to guide you through is simply that. It's an opportunity to meet and use our hands as a gateway to warmth. Doesn't fix anything. It doesn't solve anything. It's not going to make that grocery lineup go any faster. It's not going to make, the person who just yelled at you as you're driving along go away. It's just going to remind you to soothe your own system. And so I'm going to invite you to be open and curious to it, like I had to be. Again, the first time I was like, I don't know. I use this practice. For me, it's a hand to my heart. I'm going to share with you a few different ways to try it. Just to see what works. And the invitation is where do you notice warmth? Where do you notice as you touch yourself a feeling of sort of warmth or love or care resonates through your body? Because we can access that whenever we are struggling. And so, I'll just before we actually practice it, I want to share again an opportunity. I had a student I use this with all the time. And I was thinking about it last night again because of grad, and the student graduated a couple years ago when I was still working at the school, and his name was William. And William was a very, very, very tall and large young man. And he would come into my office. He was also very extravagant and big and had a big flamboyant personality. And he felt big and he crashed hard. And maybe you know people like this. And William would be great in the world. And then all of a sudden he would just have this, like, I can't take it all. He would show up in my office. And William and I would just sit there and I would look at him and I'd be like, what do you need? And he would just be like, I need to take some deep breaths. And we would both put our hands in our heart. And this is a very 6'3", very large grade 12 boy. And he would put his hand on his heart and I would put my hand on my heart, and we would just take some deep breaths, and we would be reminded that we had the capacity within. So we had some words that we would use, but I would use this practice. And what I started noticing is before I did this with William is before he started doing it, I was doing it to myself. So I would sit there with him as he was struggling, and I would feel his pain as we do because of the empathy, the empathic responses that so many of us resonate with when people are struggling. And I would just be holding my own heart and just being with him. And he would start to mirror that. as many of you know, are on mirror neurons. And he would put his hand on his heart and we would just sit there and we'd talk, and you could see his body softening and a warming come across his chest. And so not only do I use this practice now for me all the time, it is one I use when I see other people suffering as a practice to mirror for other people. And then sometimes I even invite people to say, you know, I know it's really hard right now for you. Can you just offer yourself a bit of tenderness? What does that look like for you? And a hand to the heart or different ways can be a really beautiful way for people to just soften in their own being. So we're going to try this. And what I'm going to do, and I'm kind of leading up to it because I'm going to actually guide you through 2 different exercises, and I'm going to do them back to back because we're going to kind of do them, well, not kind of, we're going to do them in a meditation practice, which means we're going to come inward for a few moments. I'm going to guide you through supportive touch, which means I'm going to offer you, I'm going to keep my eyes open and keep myself on the screen and just show you a few different places you can explore with. And as we're doing that, you're going to have a beginner's mind. You're going to be really curious. You're just going to notice. And then as we kind of figure out what works for us, I'm going to lead you right into a really common self-compassion practice called a self-compassion break. And this is a practice that I'm going to guide you through formally, meaning I'm going to invite you to just sit and reflect on, and I'm going to take you through it. And it'll take about 5 or 6 minutes. So the whole thing will take about 10 minutes in total for us to do. And as you're doing it, I want you to think about how can you do this formally, which is what we're doing, like in a meditation formal practice where I guide you. But also, how can you do it informally, which means how can you access this in everyday life? Because this is more of what self-compassion is those things that we can do every day. And I share that with you because I really want you to take all of these tangible practices so that you have something to use right away. So we're going to go through both of these and just see and feel how they go. If you like how they sound, just so you know, you can Google either of these. You can Google supportive touch or self-compassion break. You can find other people leading them if my voice is not the voice you want to listen to. If my voice does resonate with you, you can find it on my website. Again, you can practice it on an app called Insight Timer. You can hear other people lead you through this, but it's a really beautiful practice to practice. This is an open invitation to do it in whatever safe way you need to do it too. So if you want to keep your eyes open through the whole practice, you can. That's no problem. If you'd like to close your eyes, it's also an open invitation as we get started. The last thing I'll say just before I jump into this practice, I have to apologize ahead of time. To be able to do this practice, the second part anyways, the self-compassion break, I'm going to have to ask you to think about something you're struggling with in your life. And to do this, you have to have a little bit of stress in your world. So I apologize ahead of time because nobody wants to create struggle in their lives that aren't already there. But I also am going to ask you to, when we get into this practice, to not choose like the 9 out of 10 stressors in your life, because we also want to keep ourselves safe. And I want you to experience a positive experience with this and actually feel success with it. So pick something that's like a 5 or 6 on a scale of 10, like something that causes a little bit of stress in your life, but doesn't put you into overwhelm, meaning I don't want you in tears. I don't want you, disassociating. I want you checking out. I want you here still, always listening to what I'm saying. Okay. So here's what I'm going to invite you to do. The first thing we're going to start into supportive touch. So when you feel ready, just take your own hand and just grab them together. So just holding your own hand, you might squeeze them together. And again, you can do this with your eyes open or your eyes closed. You may gaze at me or you may gaze at your hands. You might just start rubbing your hands together a little bit, creating a bit of warmth between both of your palms. And then you might just land with your hands being held, almost like you're holding the hand of a loved one. And you look down and you might just stroke one hand or give it a squeeze. Take a big deep breath as you hold this hand. And then I'm going to invite you to take one of these palms and very gently place it upon your heart. And just notice if there's any warmth of your hand on your body. Just notice what it's like to offer yourself a gentle and caring touch. And just notice how it might feel to hold yourself with a bit of care in this moment by offering yourself this bit of warmth. You might bring both hands and place both hands over your heart and apply a little pressure like you're giving your heart a hug. Just to squeeze it a little bit. And you can stay with whatever place I invite you to try. If it resonates, and if it doesn't, you can just not do it. It's okay. You may take one of your hands and make it a fist on your heart, and then place the other hand over top of it, almost like a fierce place of like standing up for your heart. That might also resonate. Adding a little bit of fierceness into your world. You may keep one hand on your heart and put one on your abdomen. And just notice what it's like to hold your torso. To be with this whole being right now. And just notice if it needs to be still, or if it needs to be stroked or cared for or rubbed. You might like to just drop both hands down to your abdomen, your belly, and give your whole self a squeeze. Kind of giving yourself the hug that it needs today, seeing how that lands. Maybe that feels all right. At any point it feels uncomfortable, let it go. Maybe try bringing one of your hands, just laying it very gently upon your cheek, as if you're reaching out and touching a loved one you haven't seen in so long. And you say, hello, dear one. I've got you. Just letting your cheek land in your palm. You might try bringing both hands and cupping your face and just holding the face of this dear one right now. Maybe taking a big deep breath, seeing what it's like to hold the face of this loved one, of this one who is deserving of care and kindness. And you might just drop your arms down and squeeze your arms, maybe giving yourself one squeeze on either side. Noticing what felt easy, what felt warm, what felt comforting, what felt soothing. And then allow your hands to land back in your lap. I'm going to invite you to consider something that you are struggling with right now as we lead into our next practice, which is our self-compassion break. So allowing yourself to think about something that you've recently failed at, or that you're feeling inadequate about, or health concern, conversation that's hard. And again, please don't choose the 9 out of 10 stressor in your life right now. Choose something that is something you can work with. 5 or 6 out of 10, but something that creates a bit of discomfort as you think about it. You get a little bit of feeling or discomfort in your body. Also, if you, like many other human beings, have 5, 6, 7, 10 different scenarios running through your brain of things that you're struggling with right now, just choose one to work with. I can guarantee you can go back and do this again with the other scenarios in your head. And then once you've chosen one, allow yourself a moment to kind of get caught up in it. Like, what's happened? What might happen? Who was there? What was said? What might be said? Allow yourself to feel it to a point of a little bit of discomfort. And I'm going to offer you some words, some phrases. I'm going to invite you just to say them back to yourself in a real tender and caring way. And the first phrase is, this is the moment of suffering. Or this is the moment that's difficult. Might even sound something like, this is stressful, or this is hard, or just ouch. But what we're doing is we're inviting that first component of self-compassion. This is mindfulness. Just naming, this is a moment of suffering. Really giving yourself that permission. And taking a big deep breath, offering yourself this phrase, other people would feel just like me. Or perhaps you say something like, I'm not alone, or this is what it's like to be a human, or others would experience this just like me. Sometimes people just to say, just like me. Others too feel this. That beautiful reminder of our common humanity. You're not alone. Other people are just like you. It's a really lovely time in this moment to just offer yourself that soothing touch. If you notice something worked for you, or you felt a bit of warmth, or you're feeling any discomfort in your body, a hand to your heart or your cheek, meeting yourself with a bit of kindness right now, and then offering yourself the phrases, may I be kind to myself? May I offer myself the compassion I need? It might also sound something more of like what you need. Maybe you need to say, may I be brave in this moment? May I know that I'm enough? May I believe I can do hard things? May I rest in love? Think perhaps what words come up for you that you might need right now. And if you're not really sure what those words are, again, I invite you to think, what would you say to a friend right now if they were struggling with the same thing as you are? And could you offer those same words, those same heartfelt words back to your own heart right now? What is it that you need right now? Taking a big, deep breath. And as you exhale, letting go of this practice and allowing yourself to feel and experience whatever you are feeling, and to allow yourself to be just as you are in this moment. This practice is called a self-compassion break. Again, it brings in the components of self-compassion, mindfulness, common humanity, loving kindness, with the reminders by using words to sort of center us and ground us in those moments. It can be done as we just did in 5 or 6 minutes with an invitation to just reflect. It can also be done as quickly as, ouch, this is hard. What do I need? 10 seconds. It can be simply the awareness that this is a moment that's hard. Other people feel just like me. And that beautiful question that we need to ask, and which was our third takeaway tonight, which is, what do I need right now? And it's the quintessential question of self-compassion. And if, as caregivers, as many of you are, as counselors, therapists, educators, you're very good at saying, what do you need, or how can I help? And when we turn this back towards ourselves, what does this one need? What do I need right now? It's a different invitation towards recognizing care for ourselves. And doing this in a real compassionate way is this behavioral act of self-care. It's the showing up and caring for ourselves in a really intentional way. We don't always have the answer to this question. I've spoken with lots of people, and they say, I know that question is really important, but I don't know the answer yet. And I often like to remind people that, put this question, put it on a Post-it note in your bathroom, on your fridge, beside your bed, beside your desk, on your computer. And every now and then keep saying, what do I need right now? And it's that open, intentional curiosity. And sometimes, the answer to this question is like, I need a glass of wine and a bag of chips, and I need everyone to leave me alone, right? But often when we peel back the layer of like, what do I really need right now? It's usually around deeply caring for ourselves. It's about connection. It's about, well-being. And for me, often when I ask that question on a really tough day, it's, I need to get out and go for a walk, a really big mental health walk, or some sort of exercise. Even if it's hard, I have to put on my fierce compassion shoes, right? And say, okay, girl, get out the door. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes I actually need to take a bath and read a funny book and just allow myself a moment of pause and give myself permission for a little bit of space. Sometimes I need to cuddle my kids in bed and read them Harry Potter, right? Like sometimes it's about connection, or it's about going on a date with my partner. And so I think the question here around self-compassion is really starting to ask ourselves and give ourselves this permission. And with that, what I want us to do is take a moment to reflect for a moment and take in these 3 practices that we just did. And so, as many of you have come in here to this opportunity to try and see what self-compassion is and what it feels like, and also to learn how to model it, what I want to invite you to do is take a moment to see how this might resonate for you. And Nikki's going to put us into small groups of 3 or 4. And if small groups right now has you going, I'm out, I'm leaving, please don't leave yet. I already see some of you, I see you're going to small groups, you want to leave. Just pause for a second, don't leave yet. Because if you're like me and someone says breakout rooms in a big group, I'm like, my inner anxiety is like, there's no way, that's the most uncomfortable feeling. I totally understand. So I hear you. I'm going to set you up so you're really safe. So the first thing I want to say is, this is an invitation to join a breakout room if you choose. If you would like to stay here on the main page with Nikki and I, we will stay here and we'll have a moment to stay in this small group. However, one of the things we know about self-compassion is actually taking a moment to noticing and reflecting and saying out loud. The verbalizing, as many of you know as therapists, can help us sort of retain things a little bit. So if you can tap into your fierce compassion and your courageous self for a moment and can say, this is uncomfortable and I can do hard things, and you choose to go into a small group, then you have also some choice in how that might look for yourself. You can reflect on one of the practices that you just tried, and you can choose to see how it felt and just talk about that. You can talk about how you'd like to use these practices in your practice or with other people. Or if you're really feeling like you wanted to try, you could even say, can I just lead you through how I think this sounds and how I'd like to try it with, if I was, doing this with a client. These small groups, I'm that first person that says, please, my anxiety grows. And so actually I do this on purpose, because one of self-compassion is putting ourselves through a bit of discomfort and meeting it. So if right now you're feeling a little bit of uneasiness, I'm going to invite you to put your hand on your heart and take a deep breath and practice this moment of self-compassion and say, what could I learn? Not what am I afraid of right now? Because small groups have a really great opportunity, and we're not going to stay there long. We're going to stay maybe probably less than 12 minutes, 10 minutes in these small groups, so we can come back and have some questions and answers. So Nikki's going to open those groups. If you decide to go in the group, please take a few minutes to get to know each other. If you're staying here, that's fine too. And don't leave still, because I have more to share with you when we get back after these groups. So I really want you, I've got one more big practice I want to share with you when we come back from these small groups. So you'll have the opportunity to put your cameras on and unmute yourself when you get into those small groups. Nikki's going to open those right now. I hope you enjoy those groups and reflect with each other, and I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. As we wait for some people to get back here, we won't probably reflect on that too much. But as you're waiting here, you might just think about this concept of giving and receiving compassion, which is kind of what we've all been modeling a little bit in this moment of challenges and how we do this. And we're just got a few more seconds before those breakout groups come back. But this idea, and welcome back to all of you who took the time to be in a small group. And I hope you had a chance to reflect. And some of us stayed behind here and some of us went and had some really wonderful conversations. So however that was for you, and however you got to share your practice, I just want to thank you for going through that process, feeling a little bit of discomfort, feeling a little bit of maybe anxiety or worry, or, it worked, it didn't work. And how did you meet it? And, one of the wonderful ways is remembering that the more we give ourselves compassion, the more it's easier to receive it. The more we give out to the other people, the more we can receive it for ourselves. Again, I started with this circle of compassion, and I just want to honor that. And one of the most beautiful ways to do that is simply breathing in kindness for ourselves and breathing out kindness for others. And it can be a simple reminder when we're feeling activated, also as a hand to our heart. You can see me, I still keep my hand on my heart when I notice things like, slow down, sweetheart, is often words that I need to say. And so, giving and receiving compassion can also be a wonderful practice to do that. I invited you in the beginning to remember that we were going to leave here with 3 takeaways. The first was being human is hard. It's that beautiful reminder of this mindfulness, the component. Second takeaway, I said, you're not alone in your fatigue, your feelings, your emotions right now. This is common humanity. This is that component of messy humanness, right? And this powerful question of self-compassion. What do you need? And if that's what you take away today, that'd probably be the number one thing I want you to remember. Self-compassion is easy in theory. We can understand it. We get it. Like, it's really easy to understand. Yes, I just need to be mindful. I need to be kind to myself. I need to meet myself with care. Knowing it and feeling it is different things. The way we get to it is an ongoing practice. It's actually retraining our brain to think and to be in different capacities. Someone said in the chat earlier, the older they got, the more they were able to be a little bit more kinder to themselves. This is an ongoing practice of intentionality. There's a lot of doubts or fears that this is not easy, and it isn't sometimes, because it's not the ingrained practices that many of us were taught. So recognizing space for this and deeply caring for ourselves is part of the practice around how do we continue to invite compassion for ourselves so that we can share it with others. And then the other thing I just want to note is that when we practice self-care, when we do it intentional to alleviate the struggles that we're feeling, so in those moments when it's hard and we ask ourselves, what do I need right now? And we practice caring for ourselves, this is the action of self-compassion, behavioral self-compassion. It's the showing up on purpose and doing the things that meet us in the right moment. And we need to prioritize well-being as a practice, especially for those of us who are caregivers. You're a therapist, counselor, educator, parent. Prioritizing this means that we then have the greater capacity to give it out and to model it and to share it. And I think the most important way to practice self-compassion or to model self-compassion is to practice it. The more we actually live it and embody it, so move from the knowing to the feeling, is how we can actually move and shift other people in it too. That's a really important piece. How do you share this with so many people? There are so many great resources out there, especially for youth and for teens. If you work in a world where there's lots of teens, so beyond the work of, Kristen Neff and Chris Germer in my book, there's a lot of work there for teens and for people out there, and for parents. If you're interested in any of this work, I invite you to keep looking at it. A lot of these are great practices. If you want to go to my website or the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, you will find a lot of ways you can access and use these practices on a regular basis. The one thing I'll say is what's common with all of these books is none of them are just reads. They're all include practices that you have to try. And because that this is nothing that you can just know, you have to embody, you have to continue to show up and do this work. One of my favorite teachers is a mindfulness teacher named Jack Kornfield, and he says, if your compassion doesn't include yourself, it is incomplete. And if many of you as caregivers are showing up and giving compassion outward on a regular basis, and you're finding yourself at a state of fatigue, tiredness, overwhelm, it is probably because you haven't been including yourself in this circle. And so my invitation today is to remind you that this is part of the practice of caring for others, is the practice of caring for ourselves. I know Nikki's dropped my website in there, but if anybody has any questions, wonderings, or comments, and you would like to add them, you are welcome to drop them in the chat or put your hand up as we're wrapping up our session. And so we'll wait a couple minutes with your questions or comments. And in the meantime, the rest of you, as you're considering what your questions or comments might be that you want to put in the chat or you want to put your hand up, please stay in touch. I really believe that this is the work that is going to change our wellness. And the way we practice it is to do it in community and connection. I love to share, especially on Instagram. So if you are on Instagram, go find me there. It's just at Lisa Baylis and follow along there. I post regularly different practices and ways of being so that we can continue to bring this to ourselves, bring this to our clients, to our students, to our children. And because I think that the best way to do this is to model it and to share it. So any questions? I'm seeing, well, thank you. You're very, very, very welcome. Those of you who are saying thank you. If you have any thoughts or questions and you'd like to share or come off mute, I would love to hear them. I appreciate your gratitude. And I also am happy to stick around to answer any thoughts or further questions. this work is really important.
While people are thinking, I want to thank you so very much, Lisa. That was a lot in an hour and a half. And so I want to thank everyone before you hop off for joining us. And I do see a question, so I'll grab the ones from the chat, and then if you have to leave, we'll see you, or the recording will be available. So the first question I see here is, how do you introduce self-compassion to people who are really new and resistant to the concept?
Oh, such a good question. And there's a lot of often where I start talking about is people's misgivings or doubts around self-compassion. Like, a lot of people think that it's, selfish, or that it's weak, or that it's just not something that they would do. So if they're feeling more doubtful about it, sometimes I bring in the research. If people who are real, and that tends to be that comment around resistance. So if they're resistant to this, my experience is the best way to bring it in is to model it at this time. Like, you can never make someone do anything. So showing them what it looks, sounds, and feels like because of your own practice tends to make people want to try it because they see how it softens you. The other thing I often just invite people is that beautiful practice around, like, what do you need right now? So that's a really lovely guiding question into that resistant place. I find I have a teenage son right now who knows all this stuff and is like, I don't do that because that's your thing. But when I remind him and just say, hey, I hear and see you're struggling, and he'll say, I don't want to do mindfulness. It's like, you don't have to, but what do you need right now? What can I offer you, support you with, and care for you? I'm just, or, just modeling. And my hand is on my heart and I'm just supporting that. So I see it's Chris that asked that question. Thanks, Chris. That's a really good question. So there's a lot of research out there. If you Google misgivings of self-compassion, you can find the actual research about how to meet some of that. And there's some really great work in there. There's a few articles. And other than that, I would just start with that question. What do you need right now? How can I help you? I hope that answers your question.
If anyone else has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. We don't want to rush anyone.
Well, I first want to thank you so much. This really was a lovely presentation, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I just wanted to share with you what really, really resonated with me is how we can get really caught up in especially taking care of other people and have we done the right thing. And I'm a nurse as well as a family therapist, and my training was that you reflect on your work. What went wrong? What could you do better? How can it be better the next day? And then that sort of continues on in your life of how can you do things better, instead of saying, wow, you really were just good today, and to love that. And then that compassion would come through without feeling there's always feeling a sense of having to do better, get better, be better. So I thank you so much for that. That was beautifully said, and it really resonated with me. Thank you.
You're so welcome. It makes me think there's a Carl Rogers quote that says, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, but it's, when I love myself enough, then I can change. It's like that beautiful, like, when I just, like, I did the best that I can. Now I can step into how I can show it better. Right. And it's like, and I accept myself the way I am. So then I can continue to do more.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful thing. I love that. I think for myself right now to say that would feel like that's kind of a giving up thing. I have to accept myself. I think it's going to take a little bit for me to get there. But that's a beautiful place to go, and to feel proud that, okay, I have done the best that I can do, and feel good about that. That's excellent. Thank you.
You're so welcome, Roseanne. Thank you. And for any of you who are sort of feeling like Roseanne, like, yeah, that's a big jump for me to go from like where I am to there. You're not alone. That's where many of us start. And that's where ongoing practice community is a big part of it. So, check out some of the work that I do. There's lots of communities that I engage with. There are 6-week, 8-week courses, like, where you can, this is a very, very short intro, and there's no way we can start and say, like, check, I've got self-compassion here. This is the beginning of ongoing practice.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Much, Roseanne. I know if you have to leave, we don't want to hold you, but I'm gonna bring the last question that came in the chat. So I have a client that's deeply entrenched in a core belief that she is a screw up. She tells me that these self-compassion practices ring hollow with her. I think we need to work on the core beliefs first. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's such a good piece. And, you know, challenging limiting beliefs can be a good place to start. I believe sometimes self-compassion can come into where we value. So coming into what is important, you know, how do we come back to what's really important to you? You know, I love how you said ring hollow, because I think that's kind of what Roseanne was saying too, a little bit, like to go from here to here is such a big jump. Like you know, that doesn't mean anything to say fully accept myself. I'm not even there. Like, I think I'm a screw up is a big difference to today I felt like a screw up, but I'm not alone. Okay, other people feel like they screw up too. Okay, there's a big shift just in that. Like, you know what? You're not alone, that other people feel kind of like they're always messing things up. And that's a real hard thing to do. And what if we all felt that way all the time? How exhausting. Wonder what we could do differently. So I think, you know, I see it's Lizanne in there. Challenging that limiting belief a little bit can be a really good place, not to jump from like, let's love ourselves up to like, there is a lot of steps in between there. And that self-compassion is that ongoing practice that is just a check-in. So, you know, maybe it's the next time we have that limiting, that belief I'm such a screw up. It's like, well, what other words do you need to hear right now? What other thing could you say instead that might soften what you're explaining, because this isn't helping you? And how else can we just want to tap into a compassionate voice rather than a critical voice. And it doesn't happen overnight.
With this one here about this client feeling like a screw up, what if you were to bring in, you know, do you have any friends that you think may be in the same boat as you as a screw up? And what would you say to them if that would help this individual move from it resonating being hollow? Or do you think that that's too soon to be able to do that? Or is that could that be a starting point as well?
So Roseanne just modeled the how do you treat yourself like you treat a friend exercise. So great practice always, you know, like, do your friends feel this way? What would you say to if your best friend came in and said, I'm such a screw up, what would you say? I've done that many times with different clients. And sometimes they're like, yeah, it's fine, but I don't deserve it, right? So there is some limiting beliefs, and you don't just jump into it. But I think that it's always a great thing. Like, what would you say to your friend? You know, if I came to you and said, I'm a screw up, what would you say to me? Oh, you have, and I play a lot in humor. Oh, you have a compassionate voice. Oh, how interesting. I see it. You're very good at that, right? Like, it's there. I'm so curious what that might sound like if you offered that to yourself. So you are all very skilled and talented people. You will find your own way through this. Please stay in touch, keep practicing, stay connected, find a group, a class, and ongoing. This is just the beginning of your journey on self-compassion.
And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you so much, Lisa, for just giving us the complex and the scaling it back as well. And I hope everyone has a lovely evening.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks, Lisa.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye-bye.
now.
Bye.